The film Materialists is a melodrama with protagonist who is considered more rational, whatever that means, than ordinary people, which places her in the rational category. Guess why? The protagonist does a difficult and thankless job, optimizing partner search for people whose search function is extremely complex, cannot be formalized, who only share fragmented bits of information, which may even mislead her about how their search actually works. We see that the protagonist responsibly formalizes and remembers the rules she's been told and follows them, but misses hidden variables and inevitably makes mistakes in this uncertain space. You need very strong calibration to make accurate guesses, and even that might not help, because every case is different and you will inevitably be wrong. The level of uncertainty is so high that such a promise may very well never be fulfilled, especially considering how rarely people feel they're married the love of their life. The central conflict of this film, and now there will be spoilers, just a warning, is the protagonist's choice between two men. The first is poor but young, with alpha male look, and triggers a hormonal rush in the protagonist. However, in the first half of the film, that hormonal rush has already worn off. The protagonist's receptors no longer itch from a lack of stimulation from her ex. Now the familiar stimulation is earning money through the job she already knows well. Then the protagonist meets an oligarch, Pedro Pascal, who does not sexually attract her, but also does not irritate her in any way, and his money is desirable. At some point the protagonist says that if she were to be with someone, it would only be someone with a lot of money, and Pedro Pascal fits that image. She even tries to start a relationship with him, somewhat reluctantly, because the hormone surge doesn't come. But other parameters she's been looking for are present, and now the protagonist compares him to her recently reappeared ex. And this ex reactivates all the neural circuits in her brain, which get flooded with pleasant neurotransmitters, and she notices how good it feels. In contrast, when she has sex with the oligarch and she wants to stay with her, she compares the two forecasts to continue living as she did in the first half of the film, without recent receptor hyperstimulation, or to pursue success in life for the sake of that hyperstimulation that came back when the ex appeared. How does this work? Let's use beer as an analogy. If you quit drinking beer because it was interfering with your goals, and then you drink again, you get an unprecedented spike of hyperstimulation in your receptors. Now they start to hurt after drinking. Why? Read biology books. And now this pain attempts you to drink beer again. That pain doesn't exist because your receptors were in balance. They hadn't been hyperstimulated by beer for a long time, so they didn't hurt. And that pain wasn't the reason you drank beer every day. But now that pain exists, and it becomes the reason behind your actions. It could be beer, cigarettes, sugar, or an ex. All this hyperstimulate brain receptors. So, if the protagonists hadn't met her ex, she probably would have stayed with the oligarch. Oligarch. But her receptors, which hadn't with the oligarch. But her receptors, which hadn't yet adapted, now compared everything to that recent stimulation and sent her pain signals while she's with the oligarch. It may seem like there is no pain, but it's enough for her to reject him. If this pain didn't so strongly determine people's decisions, I would have used some softer terms, like discomfort. However, I noticed that even minor receptor pain strongly shapes people's choices, that I continue using the word pain to emphasize the intensity of the sensation. What can be predicted from the film's editing? Spoiler: the main character stays with the ex and rejects the oligarch. The ex is poor, lives in uncomfortable condition, and didn't meet many of the protagonist's desired parameters. But he met one. He caused her receptor hyperstimulation. I predict that once the protagonist receptors adapt, likely within a week or two, she'll regret her choice because the receptor sensitivity will return to baseline just like before. But her need for money and comfort will remain. Movies often promote the stereotype of eternal love, but psychology in the real world doesn't work that way. I expect this ending because if the protagonist had chosen the oligarch and there was no oxytocin or other hormone package response to him, the target audience, women who watch these romantic movies to stimulate their own receptors via mirroring, wouldn't get what they came for. They wouldn't be able to mirror the protagonist's state and get the hormone rush. They would feel disappointed, which would affect reviews and box office results. So, for word-of-mouth success, the filmmakers are forced to make the protagonist experience receptor hyperstimulation at the end, so the audience can too. That's my theory. If the protagonists were a real person, my advice to her would be to choose the oligarch. I tell her that hyperstimulation of receptors by a specific person it's easy to train, especially if he helps you solve current problems and supports you in every way. Loyalty becomes inevitable as you interact more with him. More and more of your neural circuits that recognize him being reserving neurotransmitters based on the lack of stress in past interactions. This way you can get hyperstimulation even where it didn't exist before. You may have noticed this effect if you initially met someone and felt nothing, but later began to feel something. That's because you built a mental model of that person, and as your neurons activate that model more frequently, you get increasingly pleasant sensations, if there's not too much stress linked to that person. In other words, she would have fallen in love with the oligarch. Maybe he wouldn't attract her as much sexually, but the feeling would definitely be more pleasant than what she experienced when she dumped him, because that contrast-based pain would no longer exist. So before dumping someone with rare qualities that you expect to need in the future based on receptors' pain when interacting with them, make sure you'll find a replacement. And keep in mind that this stress will go away if you train your brain. That's all, thanks for watching. My views and subscriptions are really low, so I want you to visit my channel where things are happening. You are missing out and feeling stress from missed opportunities. Also, I need family portraits, really, a house in Moscow, and a free video editor. Bye, Steve Bucket. Bye.